Hi, I'm Desmond McCaffrey from the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning here at the University of Connecticut. This video that you're going to watch today is about developing learning objectives. In my work as a teacher and as a fact developer of both face-to-face and online courses, I've had quite a bit of experience developing learning objectives for courses, either my own or with clients I've worked with. Learning objectives, as far as I'm concerned, are the foundation of any good teaching and learning environment. So I'm hoping that you're here today to watch this video because you are looking for some help writing learning objectives yourself. You may be teaching a course, teaching a class, perhaps you're setting up some training or even doing a presentation at a conference. In any of these situations, I think you'll find that if you write good learning objectives to drive everything you do, that you'll be more effective as an instructor, as a teacher, or as a presenter, and that your students or the participants in your activities will have a better chance at learning and will walk out of whatever it is you're presenting to them or teaching to them, having gained new skills, new knowledge, and new abilities. So really, that's the importance of this video today, to help you achieve those things before you create your course, your class, your presentation, or your workshop. Because this video is about learning objectives, I thought it would be a good idea to start with my learning objectives for you. So I do have these learning objectives, and upon watching this video, I hope that you will be able to define the term learning objective, explain the 4 benefits associated with writing learning objectives, describe the elements of well-written learning objectives, and list several caveats related to writing learning objectives. Ultimately, I also hope you'll be able to write learning objectives yourself. I won't be able to measure whether or not you do, but I am going to give you some materials and resources that will walk you through even further the process of writing learning objectives. So maybe an unwritten objective I have for you today is that when you're done watching this video, you'll also be able to write high-quality learning objectives. So you may be asking yourself, what are learning objectives? Hopefully you're here watching this video because you already have an idea of what they are. Learning objectives, I want to say before I define them, are but one part of a larger course design or presentation design or workshop design process. I do feel that learning objectives are one of the most important components, but it's important to keep in mind that anytime we have learning, we should also have some activities occurring, we should have some assessment or evaluation, even reflections from students. These are all dependent upon having good learning objectives written up front. But I want to contextualize and make sure you understood that if all you do is write good learning objectives, it doesn't guarantee that your teaching and learning experience will be better, but it certainly does set the foundation for that. So learning objectives are statements that describe exactly what students will be able to do after completing a learning activity, a series of activities, a lesson, a unit of study, a workshop, a professional presentation, or even an entire course. Again, learning objectives are statements that describe exactly what students should be able to do. So why are learning objectives important? Well, there's 4 points I'd like you to take away from the video today. First of all, learning objectives are important for students. When students have clear learning objectives, they also have clear expectations and an understanding of what it is they'll be working towards in your learning environment or your course. Learning objectives allow students to focus their efforts and to see what the ultimate outcome is. The learning objective is their ultimate outcome, and they can work towards it when it's clear, measurable, and student-centered. The second thing that learning objectives allow for is you, the instructor or the faculty member, to create a course or learning environment based on what you believe is best, based on your expertise, not based on a textbook or someone else's notes. Learning objectives allow you to define what it is the course should be about, what it is the workshop should be about, and specifically what you know the participants and the students should be able to do when they complete your course of study or your presentation or your workshop. The third important thing here is that using objectives as a starting point, you will be able to identify the best teaching strategies and the most appropriate course components for your students. This includes aligning your assessments, so measuring whether or not students can achieve this learning objective you've written, activities to ensure that students go from a point of not being able to do something to being able to do something, in other words, being able to meet your learning objective, and the materials and content that the students will interact with to ensure that they're able to do what you've set up for them in the form of a learning objective. The last element here is that after the course is taught, once you've set up that environment with a learning objective and assessment, your activities and your content in the middle, you can now look at this entire system. You know what you've set up as an expectation for your students. You've measured whether the students can do it or not. You've developed an environment in which they're going through activities and interacting with content and materials so that they can now do that, meet that objective. So now what you want to be able to do after the course is done is evaluate your success. You can now evaluate based on very clearly written student learning objectives, and you can see whether or not the students have achieved them. And if the students have achieved them or haven't achieved them, you can now look ahead for the iterative process of improving your course, improving your workshop, improving your presentation, improving whatever learning environment it is, but it's based very clearly on those learning objectives that you've set up front. So now that we agree to the importance of learning objectives and have some explanation of why they're important, how they help us, let's look at some of the guidelines for writing them. There are some generally accepted methods, but it's important to note that you may encounter variations between ways in which learning objectives are written. You usually see these variations across the areas in which the teaching and learning is occurring, whether it's K through 12, higher education, the corporate training environment, workshops, or presentations. It's when you move between these environments that you might find one or another version of guidelines for writing learning objectives. At their core, though, they all have the same two features, and that would be audience and behavior. So we need to define in our learning objectives who the audience is and what the behavior is. If you think back to my objectives for the beginning of this course video, you'll notice that I have a very clear audience, and that's you, and I also have behaviors. You will be able to define, explain, describe, and list. So I've already met the A and B, the audience and the behavior. In other situations, we see that conditions and degrees are also added to learning objectives. I'll talk about conditions and degree in a bit more detail in the next few slides. So let's look at an objective here. Students will be able to explain 4 benefits associated with writing learning objectives. Let's look for the A and the B. Hopefully you've seen that the A is the students. And in almost every situation when I write learning objectives, we're talking about students. Students will be able to. And this is my favorite phrase. It defines very clearly who, the students, and that they will be able to do something actionable, something measurable. In this case, that behavior is explained. So upon completing the activity, in this case the video you're watching, you should be able to explain 4 benefits associated with writing learning objectives. Here again we have the A, audience, and B, behavior of a well-written learning objective. Here's an example that has the A, B, C, and D. Same audience, same behavior, but I've added a condition and a degree. Given an instructional video, this is our condition, students will be able to, there is our audience, explain with 100% accuracy. There is our degree, with 100% accuracy, 4 benefits associated with writing learning objectives. So as you'll see between these 2 examples, we have audience and behavior in both. You'll also notice that the audience, in this case, is students, that the behavior is measurable. When we add the condition and the degree, it just adds a little bit more specificity. We often see this with accrediting agencies. We see it in corporate training quite frequently, that the degree and condition have been added to the objective so that the instructor and the participants have a bit more clear understanding of what will happen and how it will happen and how they will be measured. So let's just go through these elements of writing learning objectives, A, B, C, and D, real quickly again, so we're sure we understand what they are. The 4 elements start with audience. Who is your target audience? You might take a second now to think about the situation you're in. Are you creating K through 12 teaching and learning environments? Are you teaching in higher education? Is this a corporate training? Are you doing a workshop? Or is this some form of presentation? I often use the term students, most often students in terms of the work I do, and students will be able to, but often we'll have participants or trainees. Either way, what you want to make sure you're doing is identifying the people who are actively involved in learning the new knowledge, skills, or behaviors. This is your audience. The behavior is what will the audience be able to do. You want to state this in measurable, observable terms, as I mentioned earlier. I'm going to give you a second to copy down this URL, tinyurl.com/bloombulb. What this will actually do is take you to Bloom's taxonomy verbs. So when we're talking about behavior and we want to write these behaviors in measurable, observable terms, even today, after over 13 years of writing learning objectives, either for myself or for the faculty I work with, I quite frequently take the Bloom's taxonomy document out of my folder and I look at it because it allows me to see all of the different possible verbs I might use. The other thing that's important to recognize about Bloom's taxonomy is when Bloom wrote this, he went from a lower level to a higher level. It is a hierarchy going from knowledge to comprehension to application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. And as you look through these verbs, you'll notice the difference between describe, discuss, demonstrate, categorize, rearrange, summarize, appraise. They vary as they go from lower order to higher order skills. So we've discussed the audience and the behavior. The next element would be the condition. So within what conditions and/or constraints will the audience be expected to perform these tasks? Upon completion of this video is one condition. As a result of this group activity would be another condition. Using the primary sources as a reference is another condition. Depending on the situation you're in, you may choose to use the condition or you may leave the condition unstated in the objective, and it will be covered either in the syllabus or other materials that the students will have. Similar to conditions, degree is not always stated explicitly. And again, depending on your situation, whether you're doing training, corporate level training, based it on some sort of external accrediting agency, you may or may not have the degree. If you are using the degree though, this is what you're looking for. You want to know how well will the behavior need to be performed? How will the performance be evaluated? And what is the degree of mastery needed? So, student-centered and measurable would be a degree of writing good learning objectives. I might say students will be able to write learning objectives, but if I put a degree on there, I will say students will be able to write learning objectives that are student-centered and measurable. Or I might say with 100% accuracy. You'll have a chance to practice this later on and look through the resources I've given you and try it on your own if this is applicable to the situation in which you are writing learning objectives. We've talked a little bit about the benefits of learning objectives, what they are, where we see them, and even the different ways we can write them. Hopefully right now you might be asking yourself, are there any concerns I should have? Any caveats I should be aware of before I write my learning objectives? And as you can see by my slide here, there are. I can tell you that there's some very common mistakes that faculty, presenters, anyone creating learning environments make when writing learning objectives. And not everyone makes these mistakes, but when mistakes are made, these are the ones that come across most frequently. The first thing is that we often find faculty not writing measurable outcomes. Students will understand why we use learning objectives, for example, is not a measurable learning objective. If I said students will be able to explain why we use learning objectives, I could stop a student on the way out of the class and say, explain to me why we use learning objectives. And they could say, I want students to know what the activities will be and what direction they should go in. I want myself to be able to align my assessments and activities accurately, and I want to have a basis from which I can make an iterative change for the better in my curriculum down the road. Say, excellent. You have explained to me why we use learning objectives. Now, if I stop the same student on the way out the door and I say, do you understand why we use learning objectives? That student could say, yes, I understand. This is not measurable. Understand is not a way that is not a verb that allows me to set up an assessment that really assesses what it is they can or cannot do. So it's very important, going back to that Bloom's bulb, the idea of measurable verbs, that we use those measurable verbs. Every time I give this presentation, I reiterate this, and inevitably someone still makes that mistake of understand. And it's understandable that this happens. However, if you know now, and when you go to write your learning objectives, you take out your Bloom's taxonomy, chances are you will not write students will understand, but instead you will write students will be able to, and you will choose a measurable verb. The next example is that often it's not student-centered. So instead of saying students will be able to write learning objectives, I will say I will teach students to write learning objectives. Is this an outcome? Sure, you can say it's an outcome. It might be the teacher's outcome. What am I going to do? I'm going to teach, but it doesn't explain what the students will be able to do. So if I'm setting up student assessments, I can't set a student assessment that assesses if I taught or not, if I am teaching. I can assess whether students can write those learning objectives. So first, I would like it to be measurable, not understand, but some other measurable term, and I would like it to be students will be able to, not the teacher or I. Student-centered and measurable. The last example I bring up because we see it quite frequently, even with the Bloom's taxonomy sheet. Develop is a verb that you will see in the Bloom's taxonomy sheet. So often, participants in one of these workshops will say, I'm using develop, that's my measurable verb. Students will develop an appreciation. Or often it will say, students will develop an understanding for the importance of writing objectives. Appreciate the effort, but developing an understanding is just as immeasurable as understand itself. So rather, we might say students will be able to explain the importance of writing objectives. And again, to give the visual, I can stop a student on the way out the door and say, explain to me the importance of writing objectives. But if I say, do you understand the importance of writing objectives? There's a very big difference between how much of that is measurable. Revisiting my objectives again, just to make sure we've clarified this, here are the two examples. They're student-centered. Students will be able to. They are measurable. Explain the 4 benefits associated with writing learning objectives. And in the last example, they are also a condition, given an instructional video, and a degree within 100% accuracy. So look at these 2 objectives for a minute, and on your own, try to focus in on the audience, the behavior, the condition, and the degree. Now that you've looked at these objectives, and I've talked to you quite a bit about what objectives are, why they're important, and how we should go about developing them, I think it's time for you to try on your own. Keep in mind, who is your audience? What is the behavior? Is that behavior measurable? And what are the conditions and degrees that are involved with your objectives? And are these important given your teaching and learning context to include in your objectives? Make sure you're using Bloom's taxonomy. You can go back in this video and find the tiny URL. And I also give you a couple resources at the end of this video that you can look at that will help you write learning objectives. So what's next? Well, hopefully after watching today's video, you now have enough information where you can go out on your own and create learning objectives as the basis for a successful teaching and learning environment, whether it's in the corporate environment, presentations, professional workshops, or probably more likely in this case, in a higher education classroom, a higher education online course, perhaps even a K-12 teaching situation. If you have further questions, would like to follow up on this, I encourage you to reach out to me. Here's my contact information. The Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning is here at the university to support all staff and faculty at the University of Connecticut. And we are also more than happy to consult with people outside of the university in anything to do with teaching and learning. Feel free to contact me. I hope this video has helped you understand better the importance of objectives and will help you to develop better learning for your students, better teaching and learning environments for you, and have a more successful teaching and learning experience in whatever it is you're doing. Thank you. Here are some resources I used to create this video. All 3 of these books deal with writing learning objectives, but they also deal with the larger questions of curriculum design. All 3 of them are used frequently when we consult with faculty at the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning.